Let's go!
Hello. We are in a realm where Phantasy Star Online 3 technically exists. And we'll describe it, right? We'll actually go into some detail because PSO2 New Genesis is technically Phantasy Star Online 3. In the same way, you know when you were on your friggin' GameCube and you selected Phantasy Star Online, Episode 1 or Episode 2? And they were essentially the same games, but they shared a different ecosystem. Or actually, they had a similar ecosystem, but they were different games. I think that's what the best way to describe it. So the more we're looking at what's going on here, the only things that seem to carry over with PSO2 into New Genesis is essentially your character's visuals and some weapons and some mag stuff. But like, in terms of all progression, that shit's reset because it's a new game. Obviously, if you just carried over your character directly, that shit wouldn't make any sense. Yeah, we're gonna go over it. We're gonna cover all of the insane stuff that has been talked about. It's actually good that they put all of this comprehensive information together to sort of give you an understanding of what exactly is going on. What's most important is that, yes, your Sega Saturn and Dreamcast mags, as well as your funky stripper pole stuff, seems like that's going to be carrying over. Some of the stuff that is directly gameplay related, like actually character stat affecting, is not. They don't want that to sort of poison the new game because they want people to be starting over. They want everyone to be on the same level, which is cool. It's really cool to think of like all the good stuff of PSO2, which is essentially the combat, right? The combat and the different weapons and the classes are some of the best aspects of the game. But managing the classes, managing the abilities, managing some weapon stuff, obviously not great. Game progression, quest progression, those are the things that are going to be going away. That's the stuff that this is specifically for. It is literally Final Fantasy 14, A Realm Reborn. And a lot of people are like, that's a bad example because FF14 Realm Reborn was only created as a result of a failing game. Well, let's just think for a second that PSO2 isn't a failing game. It's an old one. PSO2 has failed because of its age. PSO2 has essentially become a game that is hard to swallow because of games being updated over years. It's an aging MMO that's still very popular, but what they're doing here is essentially a Realm Reborning that. So that by the time you're like, oh, what about all my progress from my Final Fantasy XIV vanilla character? Did that carry over to Realm Reborn? It didn't. Like, a lot of the progress reset, but you get to keep a lot of the fluffy stuff, right? The things that you sort of had carried with you that aren't gameplay relevant. It's PSO3. It's literally Phantasy Star Online 3 in every sense of the fabrication of it. It's just that it's not called PSO3. It's called PSO2 New Genesis. Let's go over all this, I'm calling it PSO3 because it technically is, but let's go over all this PSO2 New Genesis stuff as described by Sega. The best thing they do is actually a video. These mother fifers put together a beautiful, comprehensive video about what the hell their plans are. And it seems like this is gonna probably take the most work, right? The balancing of what gets carried over and what doesn't. But it makes a lot of sense what their plans are now as a result of watching this. It makes a lot of sense that they don't want people to be completely left out, and they want these games to share a similar ecosystem. They want the games to sort of live next to each other. It is also a conclusion that no, New Genesis is its own unique thing. When you fire up Phantasy Star Online 2, the client, you're going to get a choice of either booting into PSO2 or booting into New Genesis. Similar ecosystem, different games. Very interesting. Let's go over each one of the crazy things that are in here. So actual new footage of the game, which is nice. Upgraded graphics engine and game system. The next generation. You got to look at a lot of the wording that's described here. Crazy Japanese stuff. So they're describing it as an open field online RPG, and everyone's brain immediately goes to Xeno games, right? Immediately you go to like Xenoblade and the like. And yes, there's a pretty big similarity, but at the same time, even PSO1 was a very, very claustrophobic sort of game. PSO2 does have bigger environments, but it's still a relatively extremely linear claustrophobic game. This is like booting into giant zones. Like the instances that allow for what seem to be 4 players and potentially 8 players are just going to have so much more space and room. Like way more space and room, which is why the overhauled graphic system is here to support all of this, because they're going to be data streaming things way different than PSO2, which is this funky ass 8-year-old game. Dude, I only wonder what we can actually crank this stuff to look at, right? Since it's actually got a proper day-night cycle, everything will look different. There'll probably be notorious monsters and daytime, nighttime quests and all this weird stuff. This is cool. Like, this is really a proper evolution of PSO1 to PSO2, and then technically is a PSO3 on a technical level. And oh yes, crazy ways to fly around, right? That's the one of the best things, is that immediately the first things they're showing of this game, the actual first things you watch the characters do in the trailers, if you pay attention to game trailers, what they show you is very specific. They want mobility to be a giant emphasis with this game. Huge emphasis. They are aware that players use their abilities in PSO2 to move around the map faster. And that would seem to be a thing that they just instilled into classes later on. They knew that you were going to have to use movement or these abilities to make your characters move around quicker to achieve missions and goals faster, which is great. From what I understand, that's the same sort of thing that's in Warframe. And it's one of the things that makes Warframe really cool is mobility. Like how fast you can move around the map using all of your techniques and shit. And it feels like the very large environments, the very non-restrictive, big-ass battle areas are there specifically to complement really fun mobility. Good call. That is a direct observation of how your players were playing the previous game, and everyone seemed to enjoy it. Let's just make the next game completely do that and not have to sacrifice gameplay elements because of it. This is a little crazy to me. So the weird thing is that, yes, you get your super anime character creators again, but even more stuff that even in comparison to PSO2 original character creation, you're going to have even more customization options. And you gave the players way too much in the previous game. Although I will say, I do like the default armor. I think the new default character, like Humar character creator armor, looks pretty neat. Let's just hope there's more color customization, which there probably will be, right? Hip and booty sliders, you better believe it. Their fingers move. That doesn't really do much for me. But yeah, this stuff, right? Just the fact that you get even more accessory placement, you get even more ridiculous stuff you can throw all over the character to cosplay and, shit like that. And the goofy part is that, yeah, they even show generic dude bro from the previous game rendered in PSO2 New Genesis. So this stuff directly shares in the same ecosystem. Like this is the one thing that one of the few things between PSO2 and New Genesis that will directly switch over. So if you like the way your character looks or you like your costumes from PSO2, they're going to make sure all that stuff is like remodeled and good looking in the next game, which is pretty dope. That's actually pretty dope. This sounds too ambitious, to be honest. It kind of does. That's the weird thing, is that how are they going to manage all these systems on subsystems? I'm glad they're not bringing over character progression, true character progression, levels and currency. Outside of like a couple currencies which exist that are, legit hard to get in the original PSO2, those are going to carry over, but like Meseta and like in-game currency are not. Like that shit stays in PSO2, not vanilla, but original PSO2. Is there no reason to play PSO2 then? You have to think of PSO2 as being a separate game. PSO2 is still going to be supported. It's still going to get stuff happening to it when this game comes out. You just get to choose which one you want to go into. But your character is going to be like sort of shared between the two. It's just that your experience in each game is different. So I still want to play PSO2 to get a bunch of customization, hairstyles, accessories in PSO2 vanilla before New Genesis comes out, because I might not have access to those things, right? I might only have access to some of that stuff in vanilla PSO2 or original PSO2. So I'm like, damn, I need to go get that hairstyle I really liked. I need to make sure this costume is available. I got to make sure this or this or this, if this comes out in that season that I really dig, I got to make sure all that crazy fashion shit does carry over. Is there no reason to play PSO2? There's actually quite a good one now. In all honesty, it's actually a very good call from Sega that a lot of the customization fashion stuff that is going to permeate endgame, you can get right now. You can actually already be ready for some of that shit by the time New Genesis comes out. But most likely, New Genesis is going to have stuff that just looks way better. They're just gonna have new shit that looks better. You don't need your Majima body pillow, all that goofy stuff. Fashion is always endgame. And this is just complementing the fact that everything's different. This is a different game. If you didn't notice yet, they're pretty much doing Monster Hunter. The monsters look immediately way more aggressive. Everything is doing less damage. They're trying to essentially bring PSO2 back to being simpler. The number one thing that immediately I identified was that, okay, monsters are huge. Weapons look mostly the same, but your utilization of weapons is going to be different, right? Because monsters are bigger, probably have different weak points, larger attacks, bigger scale, all that kind of stuff. Notice the damage, right? Even when you're low level in Phantasy Star Online 2, you do hundreds of points of damage. And then you eventually start doing thousands, and then 10,000s. And then there's numbers everywhere, like all over the place. So the damage is less. Why is that relevant? It boils back down to simplification. PSO2 got out of hand. PSO2 eventually started getting things that were just, why is everything so nuts in this game? Either abilities or character customization or everything. It just feels like there's just too much going on at times. And you could tell this by just me playing PSO2 with people and doing urgent quests. Them simplifying the damage is just one example, right? It's just one very, very small thing that they can do to sort of, let's just tone it down a little bit, right? Let's just bring things down and focus more on like the player experience and not have it get so bloated, right? And by bloated, literally damage numbers and shit like that. But yeah, the combat system, like everything they're showing is large scale enemies, which I think is interesting. These guys are like sort of bosses, but everything is mostly pretty big impact, large mobility. Like characters are moving and flying around all the time and shit. It almost looks like the combat's gonna be a lot more demanding. I don't like the fact that PSO2 is essentially a fairly easy grind all the way to like level 50. And then level 50 and beyond, you start to get a bit of a challenge, like a little bit. And I'm actually at that point right now where it's getting a little challenging. What they really need to do is get rid of the fact that things are just grindy and easy. Make it so that things are challenging. Make it so that you have to utilize all this mobility and stuff. Character growth will not carry over. Levels, experience, skills, photon arts, techniques, these don't carry over. Some things do carry over. AC and SG, which are unique currencies that are very specific, that are high end. You have to like purchase this stuff. But game economy currency, none. FUN, Meseta, any of that stuff, none. However, weapon units in PSO2 can be moved over, but their functions, abilities, and appearances will change. So immediately it's like, oh, okay, so I get my Sega Saturn mag, I get my crazy dog mag, I can still have the visualness of my mags, but I have to level them up all over again. Anything gameplay affecting you might be noticing that's mentioned in here does not carry over. That's because New Genesis is a new game, and they don't want any of that stuff messing up with the game balance economy that they have. Yeah, something did say in an article that weapons will be moving over, but you need to get to the level you need to use the weapon. By the time you get like a really good weapon that might be in the game, you're gonna have to get to like level 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, like whatever the hell it ends up being. So they have to keep reiterating that old PSO2 isn't going anywhere. Like your character can still go between each game like no problem. This is the equivalent of my Final Fantasy XI character from Sandoria or whatever. Well, he or she doesn't get to keep the levels and gear. Some cosmetic stuff that I got throughout my adventure in Final Fantasy XI would just directly translate over to Final Fantasy XIV. And I would have the same character log into each game. It's just that in each game, they get different abilities and different things because they're different games. It's a unique sort of thing that they're doing, and it's ambitious, and I'm a little worried about it, right? I'm hoping this doesn't delay the game like crazy. I mean, granted, it's gonna make PSO2 look dated. The cool part is that they are doing something for Phantasy Star Online 2 because it is their money tree. From what I understand, PSO2 is the most financially beneficial game for Sega in years and has been for years. So why would Sega just drop their money making? Why would they do that? Their player base might be going down a little bit, but apparently it still makes them a shit ton of money. So they're like, okay, so let's take a little bit of that shit ton of money that PSO2 has made us over the years out of being a free-to-play game, and let's make sure our players aren't screwed out, right? We don't want people just to be dropping PSO2 and just saying, screw it, I just want to go into this one. There might be things that are like, yo, there's a thing that just arrived in PSO2. There's like some crazy hairstyle or a mag or an emote or a costume or some goofy thing that you're like, shit, I would like to check that out. I would like that on my character in New Genesis. You're surprised if New Genesis is episode 7? Well, they described that. Like a lot of people were saying, is there going to be an episode 7? And they pretty much, it seems that this is episode 7. So yeah, so this is the old ass game, but they specifically say that the entire engine of PSO2, the way everything in PSO2 looks, is going to get overhauled in the same way that New Genesis sort of is with their brand new shit. I don't know if they're going to be changing the graphics engine. They're probably just going to be updating it. They're probably going to reshade it, chat. That's probably what they're going to do. They're just going to throw some bloom, throw some contrast filter, throw some other shit on it, like some peanut butter at a TV. They'll probably just reshade filter the shit out of it. If they are promoting it as being as good looking as New Genesis does, because New Genesis is a good looking fucking game, I'd argue New Genesis is probably one of the best looking online, like large scale, like MMO type games there is right now. It looks very good. It seems like a very, very, very tall order to fill. So I'm not going to be really reliant on that happening. But here's my big brain theory. How cool would it be if PSO2, before New Genesis gets like betas or anything like that, how cool would it be if PSO2 got the engine upgrade before the new game came out? Now's the best time to jump into PSO2 because it looks better than ever. How crazy would it be if they did an engine/UI overhaul on PSO2 months before New Genesis comes out so that people can actually get acclimated with PSO2 and not be confused as shit by text and menus popping up on top of text and menus? That's like best case scenario, that they revamp PSO2 so you get like sort of a taste of what New Genesis is going to be like. God, dude, I just love going back here and looking at some of the small scale combat because we don't see a whole bunch of it and how this shit looks. Free to play. The transaction model remains the same with the entire game being playable at no cost, which is what has made Sega so much goddamn. Look at all the particle effects and shit going on here. Character animations and character transition animations, which look very rough in PSO2 because it's based on character rigs from 2010. All the character animations look dope, right? Like everything about the way the characters move and how smooth the combat looks so much better than PSO2 because as the player, you make the combat insane in the previous game. So why are they still calling it PSO2? And it's pretty much back to the same thing we were describing yesterday. It's called PSO2 because the player base and the money they make from PSO2 is too big. It makes too much money. The risk of calling it PSO3 is a marketing choice that they chose not to make so that everyone can feel comfortable knowing that we're going to keep it in the same brand, right? We're going to keep it all in the same client, all in the same engine. They are playing it safe because too many people spent too much money on Phantasy Star Online 2. And what happens when a new game comes out? You naturally divide your audience. Like the same thing happened. I'm only using examples of games that I played, but Final Fantasy 11 to Final Fantasy 14, a very, very large portion of Square Enix's install base and subscriber base jumped the ship from Final Fantasy 11 when 14, came out. What did that do? That actually ended up costing them a lot because 14 wasn't good. And then they, almost lost the company and had to remake 14. They ran into issues with their player base being split up and suddenly losing almost all of their players. And they're probably looking at that going, well, we've been doing this for about as long as some of those other games. There's not a lot of these big Japanese style MMOs. What should we do? We want to keep everyone still playing our same game, right? We want to make sure the same game complements each game. New Genesis can complement PSO2 with items and progress in many ways, but just not gameplay progress. For all intents and purposes, from what Sega has explained and what we're about to read even more on, it is Phantasy Star Online 3. It absolutely is PSO3. It's just not called it for marketing reasons. They want people to feel comfortable that they're not losing everything. Ultimately, what's kind of cool about this is that you're going to log into New Genesis and your friends are still going to be there. Right? Your friend lists, your guilds most likely are just going to carry right over. Like the guild that we have for video games that isn't maintained by me, but is maintained by several people that still play PSO2 all the time. When we move over, that shit'll probably just go bloop and just pop right up in New Genesis, which is cool. I don't have to worry about reestablishing connections with people anymore. I don't have to worry about like rebuilding and relocating and shit. I don't think we have confirmation of that, but all things considered from what they're describing, that's the kind of stuff that I would like to see. That's the kind of stuff that would make a lot of sense. This shit has me so excited. Like, when people are like, why is Max excited about this? What's going on? For me, I didn't really give much of a shit about PSO2 just because it never showed up in the West. Always connecting it and getting hooked up and playing with friends was just like a struggle, and it never felt like PSO. Like, PSO2, especially at the beginning, did not really feel very Phantasy Star Online-like. So I just ignored it. However, once I started getting the hang of it, once I got past the menu hell and started actually enjoying the game with people, I began to realize, oh shit, this really is PSO. This is like Phantasy Star Online with so much more stuff that you can do. And by so much more stuff, I don't mean that in a very complimentary way. They put too much shit. It becomes convoluted and confusing. But when it boils down to like the gameplay, actually running around, shooting guns, the looting and everything like that is still there. It's just that there's more. And that's what made me really like PSO2. And now I'm like, damn, this game is really fun and I want to come back and play more of it. And as soon as this was happening, we're like talking about the potential of a PSO3. We're talking about how this old ass game that's like 8 years old and convoluted as shit still manages to be really fun and still manages to really feel like the PSO that I grew up loving. And to think about where they could go in the future. And we were talking about this all like several times of what they could do with PSO in the future. And this shit literally pops up like a month later. So, items that are not compatible between the games. Skill rings, consumables, boost items, materials, and furnishings. Regarding player data and character growth, AC and SG currencies will transfer over and be shared between games. But Meseta, Fun, all other currencies that affect the game's balance and economy, nah, that does not work. That stays per game. Character growth will also not be carrying over. So levels, XP, classes, photon arts, techniques, every crazy bullshit thing that allows you to do 10,000 damage per bullet is not carrying over. Why? It's a new game. Weapon units and mags. Here's where it gets interesting. Weapons, units, and mags obtained in PSO2 can be used in New Genesis, but their functions, abilities, and appearances will change in accordance with the game's system. Fundamental weapon design will not change. Their stats, augments, and potentials will. If you got some godlike, like a Heaven's Punisher that has 100% on forest ruins, mines, and caves, that shit ain't carrying over. Sorry, that doesn't fly. Your super like OP weapons are going to get retooled, readjusted, and might actually function completely different. But they're gonna carry over. Some higher rarity weapons may not be equipable until your character has reached that level. For weapons pertaining to classes that have not been added in PSO2, they are unusable until the class has been released. So that makes sense. I think they're going to retool and rebalance classes in general, but in all honesty, I think PSO New Genesis is going to be a game that might have a much different class system than what PSO2 had. You might have noticed in the trailer, the character goes from sword wielding, fighting a monster, and while he's running away, switches on the fly to dual machine guns or a rifle, and then switches to being a force at some point during the fight. There could definitely be some cross-pollination of classes in PSO2 New Genesis where, who knows, like maybe you're gonna be able to switch and do combinations of stuff on the fly. Units and armor will become armor that is not visible. Units that have been obtained in PSO2 will become invisible in NGS. Furthermore, similarly to weapons, their stats, augments, and potentials are gonna change. High rarity units may not be equipable until your character has reached a certain level. And although mags within PSO2 NGS do not affect your stats or aid you in battle, evolution device data will carry over. Evolution device is pretty much, from what I understand, this is just cosmetic. This just makes your mag look cool or look like a certain thing. This is a big change, you know? To think that mags in New Genesis aren't going to affect stats or aid you in battle. Feeding your mag is almost a staple of Phantasy Star Online in many ways. Maybe they want to kick to the curb the idea that you have to pay attention to your mag every 5 minutes and feed them. Is feeding mags fun? No. If PSO2 is added to new platforms, we plan to make PSO2 New Genesis available on those platforms as well. This is a timed exclusive, just like PSO2. Sometime in 2021, there will be announcements of PS4/PS5 versions, if not Steam versions, of Phantasy Star Online New Genesis. My problem is that combat in PSO2 currently is really fun because it gives you so many options. Engaging because of the mobility that your character has with photon arts and how you're able to string these things together to combo stuff and everything like that. But it does look janky, you know? It does look visually very dated. So if they could make the visual aspect of PSO2 combat more engaging by making the combat have more of like a visceral feel, which what it seems like they're doing, that's exactly what they need to do. Look how active this is, man. Like, what the fuck? Like, this is so much different than some of the shit that happens in PSO2 naturally, right? Like, this is some Monster Hunter levels of combat. It looks cool as shit. It's exactly what I wanted. Like, it's so fucking weird. It's literally what we were talking about and what I wanted. So the good part, Chad, the good news is that PSO3 is happening. It's just called Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis. And I don't think I could be any happier.